Okay, my name is Howard Eber, and I am a recovered alcoholic. Usually, this meeting, which is co-sponsored by, co-produced, however you want to look at it, by the Big Book Compendium, which Steve Wood put together, and the Big Book Comes Alive, which Kathy and I put together. But Steve is going to be out of town this evening, so I'm going to bear the brunt of the carrying of the weight here. We had started, apparently Steve started We Agnostics last week. And rather than jumping in the middle, I'm going to go back to the beginning of the chapter on page 44. And let's talk a little bit before we start this chapter. By the end of the previous chapter, by the end of We Agnostics, or I'll speak for myself, I was faced with one hell of a dilemma because Bill has been doing a great job of convincing me for the previous 46, 50 pages or whatever, that I'm not going to recover without the help of a higher power, without the help of a power greater than myself. And while I sensed that that might be the case, I just felt that based on my old ideas, emotions, and attitudes, that it was going to be that power was inaccessible to me. Um, God, I had so much misconceptions and baggage, excess baggage concerning God and religion, and that in itself is part of the problem because I thought they were one and the same. I didn't know there was a difference between God and religion. I thought when you mention God, you're talking about religion. I had no idea about this other thing called spirituality. It took me 24 years in recovery before somebody explained the difference to me between spirituality and religion. And just so I don't get blamed for doing the same thing, I was taught that religion is about a set of practices. You want to be part of our club and worship our imaginary best friend, whatever that club is, Judaism, Buddhism, whatever it is. There are certain practices you must follow. You must pray like this, eat like this, stand like this, talk like this, pray like this, etc. Those are the practices. That's what you must follow to be part of the club. Spirituality is none of that. Spirituality is a set of disciplines. We have to have a discipline for God. The definition is up to you. We also have to have a discipline for prayer and meditation. Once again, the definition of it is up to you. Nobody's going to tell you what you have to, what is your higher power, what prayer is, what is meditation. It's going to be all up to you. So, like I said, Bill knew about the conflict and confusion that many of us face concerning this God concept because he felt the same way. Remember when he was sitting at that table, whether it was just him and Ebby or there were three other people there, it's totally irrelevant. The point is, when he was sitting there and Ebby kept mentioning a God personal to him, what did he say? He said his mind slammed shut at that notion. He didn't want to hear about that. And he knew that based on our old ideas and attitudes, we were not going to be able to move ahead into the next chapter to make the decision we're going to have to make, to begin the program of action that we're going to have to make. And so he sat down and he wrote a chapter that I believe is addressed to me. Every word in this chapter rings so true, and he wrote it in such a way that it allows me to have a new understanding of God. It allows me just a little bit of new information so that I may be able to make that decision that I'm going to have to in the next chapter. It allows me to consider the fact that there may be a God, there may be a higher power. It allows me to consider it, to ponder it, to just think about whether that's a possibility or not. And that's the real genius of we agnostics, the way I see it. It lies in the fact that it doesn't try to convince anyone what God is. What this chapter does is give people like me who are having difficulty with that G word, with that concept, enough new information to open our minds to that possibility. And if we do that, then God will prove to us that there is a God. The end of this chapter states that when we drew close to him, he revealed himself to us. When we get up a couple of chapters to the eighth and the ninth step promises, we're told that God has done for us what we could not do for ourselves. So we suddenly realize that God is doing what we couldn't do for ourselves. So I believe that this chapter is written towards me. However, hang on a sec, something's coming up here. Okay. I have another take on this, and some of you may disagree, but I think we are all agnostics, every one of us. You know, the chapter is We Agnostics, and I thought for a long time he was talking about him and his selected group of fellow agnostics. He says later on the first page something about more than half of us came in with this firm belief, but I think we are all agnostics. And if you think about it, you want to know what your current agnosticism is? Let me put it this way. You know that God has removed your obsession to drink and to use. He has. You know that he has helped you to get rid of your defects, where, depending on where you are in the process, he has helped you along in that. And you know, without a doubt, that God is there for you in many, many ways. But are you absolutely certain? I mean, absolutely certain that God is going to provide for you financially, emotionally. He's going to give you that right relationship that's going to come your way suddenly? Or do you feel you have to step in and take over some of those rules to make things happen? I think that's normal. I think that's okay. I think that's natural. As I understand it, and I am not a big Bible thumper, but as I understand it, I think Jesus told his disciples that those who wanted to follow him most closely were not to have any money, were not to have any possessions, that they were only to have a bare minimum of clothing on their back, that you can expect God to provide your food, to provide your shelter, to provide everything else. Now, who among us doesn't worry to some extent about our finances, about our shelter on a daily basis? Again, normal, natural, but that's our agnosticism showing up. To find your current level of agnosticism, think about the current area of unmanageability in your life. Where are you having doubts? Think about that, because that's your agnosticism. You have somebody close to you that's having a tough time, or maybe they're sick, and you want to pray that God makes them well. Well, that's praying for an outcome, incidentally, and we're not supposed to be doing that. In the 12 and 12, Bill tells us how to deal with that particular situation, and I don't want to spend too much time on it right now. We'll get to it some other time. But the point is, we have those situations in our lives, and it's very hard to just say, God, whatever your decision as to their fate will be is okay with me. We do decide, we try to want to get involved with certain things that we have doubts about. And the truth of your current unmanageability is a reflection of your current agnosticism. So I think we're all agnostics. We all have areas where we have some doubts, where we sometimes feel we've got to step in and take control of that steering wheel a little bit. Think about it. Okay, so let's start on page 44, where Bill says, we agnostics. Again, and let's define our terms, incidentally. Agnostic is made up of two stems, two words, two phrases. AG means without. When you put AG in front of anything, it means without whatever that other word is. So AG means without, and Gnostics comes from the Greek word gnosis, which means knowledge. So agnostic means one who is without knowledge, but specifically one who is without knowledge, without experience of God's power in their life. I always find this kind of amusing. There's another word that means the same thing as agnostic, and I bet you didn't realize what it was. The word is ignorant. When you put IG in front of anything, it also means without. Ignorant comes from the Latin word for knowledge. So ignorant doesn't mean someone who's stupid, although today we use it for that. It means somebody who is lacking knowledge, the same way we are lacking knowledge, lacking experience with God in our lives. When I came here, my experience with God was limited and it was bad. When I was 14, my mom passed away after a lengthy bout with cancer. And when I asked why would he do such a thing? My dad told me because he needed her very much. And I thought, how cruel, how mean, how selfish could that possibly be? I don't want any part of anything that's going to do that. I mean, I have a 9-year-old brother and I'm 14 and God needs her more than my kid brother does? No. So my knowledge, my experience with God was a little shaky. So I wasn't really ready to take a deep plunge into this. But that's what agnostics means, okay? So in the preceding chapters, you've learned something of alcoholism. Whenever I go through this with people, I always ask them, have you learned anything about alcoholism? Have you learned about step one? Have you learned about the allergy and the obsession? We hope we have made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and above alcoholic. I've written A/O just to save time. Every time I see that word, alcoholic or real alcoholic, that means a person who has the allergy and the obsession. So rather than writing that over and over, I just put A/O. I know what it means. So we've made the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. The alcoholic has the allergy and the obsession, and guess what? The non-alcoholic does not. Now, this next sentence, I'm going to suggest you highlight it, but after I read it, we're going to turn it into two questions. The statement is, if when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely. You may want to underline cannot quit entirely. And that's because of the obsession. Or if when drinking, you have little control, please underline you have little control. And that's because of the allergy. You have little control over the amount you take. You are probably alcoholic. Now let's turn those things into questions. The first question, obviously, is, have you been able to quit entirely on your own accord? Usually I'd have Rob put these things up, but right now we don't have the time for that, so we're just going to wing it. If you would write down that question, have you been able to quit entirely on your own resources? Question number 2, do you have any control over the amount you take once you start? Do you have any control over the amount you take once you start? Those are the two questions. Now, ask yourself those questions, but before we take the first step, we have to be clear about the answers to those. So my answer is no, I have not been able to quit entirely. And no, I have no control over the amount I take once I start because of the obsession and because of the allergy. So in order to take step one, we're going to have to turn back. Keep your place right here for a moment, but please turn back, if you will, to page 30. Page 30, paragraph 2 has another statement. We learned we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery. Now, a couple of things. One, we had to is a must. We've covered this already. And please notice that he doesn't say surrender. I know we've mentioned it before, but I don't know. Sometimes people forget. The word surrender doesn't appear anywhere, not once in the first 164 pages of this book. And you'd think how often it's used at meetings that it was on every other line. Not once. Bill uses forms of the word concession, to concede. And the difference between concession and surrender is concession is absolute, total, unconditional surrender. There's a difference. I surrendered a long time ago, many, many times when I was using and when I wasn't using. I surrendered quite often, but I didn't concede until I made that final decision. Final, absolute. So we have 37 people here today. I'm going to ask you that simple question. Have you conceded to your innermost self that you are alcoholic? And if the answer is yes, congratulations, you've just taken the first step and we're moving on. We're back to page 44. The last 3 lines of that top paragraph state, if that be the case, you may be suffering, and an interesting use of the word may. It allows us to decide for ourselves. It doesn't say you are suffering. You may be. From an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. From an illness, not a moral dilemma, not a weakness of character. It is an illness. It is a chronic, progressive, fatal illness. But there is a recovery from it, which only a spiritual experience will conquer. You may want to underline spiritual experience because that is the basic premise of the AA program, right there. That the solution to our problem lies in a spiritual experience, and only a spiritual experience will conquer it. So it's progressive, it's chronic, it's fatal, but there is a solution. Continuing, to one who feels he's an atheist or agnostic, such an experience seems impossible, but to continue as he is means disaster, especially if he's an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. You may want to underline that, hopeless variety. And let's highlight this last sentence, if you will. To be doomed to an alcoholic death. In other words, stay stuck in step 1. Drink yourself to death. That's what that means. To be doomed to an alcoholic death. Stay stuck in step 1. Drink yourself to death. Or to live on a spiritual basis. Let's underline live on a spiritual basis. And that would be accept step 2. Are not always easy alternatives to face. Now, I understand that for non-alcoholics, that is a very easy decision to make. It's only the alcoholic who says, can I get back to you in the morning? Exactly. Just what do you mean by fatal? Can you be more specific? It's only the alcoholic who wants those specifics. Everyone else, you tell them you do this one thing and it's going to kill you, but there's a solution. You want to hear about it? Yeah, right away. I want to know about what it is. It's only the alcoholic who says they need time to think about it. In any case, but it isn't so difficult. Here's hope. Here's hope. About half our original fellowship were of exactly that type. At first, some of us tried to avoid the issue. Let's underline avoid. We tried to avoid, and over the next few pages, Bill is going to point out that we avoided the issue, we evaded the issue, we ignored the issue, we abandoned the issue, and we even rejected the issue, all until we could not postpone or evade it any longer. So here's the first mention of that series. We are avoiding the issue. Any avoiders here? Yeah, I bet there's a whole lot of avoiders, sure. Hoping against hope. Any hopers here, right? We were not true alcoholics. Not true alcoholics. But after a while, and you may want to underline, but after a while, and think about the fact that when he says, but after a while, he's also talking about when sober. It's not just after a while when we're active. After a while when we're sober, and for me, that while was 24 years, we had to face the fact, that's a must, we had to face the fact, an underlying fact, that we must, there's another must, find the spiritual basis of life, or else obviously is die. And that's not just referring to a decision or something that we had to face when we were drinking and drugging. I had to face that in sobriety. I won't call it sobriety, I'll call it sobriety. But I had to face that. I wasn't drinking, I wasn't drugging, but I also wasn't doing anything else besides going to meetings. So, continuing, perhaps it's going to be that way with you, but cheer up. Something like half of us thought we were atheists or agnostic. Our experience, you may want to underline that word, our experience, not our theory, not our writings, our discussions. Our experience shows you need not be disconcerted, troubled. You need not be troubled. That's what disconcerted means, troubled. If a mere code of morals, please underline morals, or a better philosophy, please underline philosophy, of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. One of the things I like to do in our workshops is point out how many times Bill uses terms like recovered or permanent sobriety, permanent recovery. And in order to draw it, to focus on it, we highlight it in orange. So you may want to highlight recovered in orange, long ago. But he mentioned something here. He said, if a mere code of morals, concept of right and wrong. I thought I had a pretty good concept of what was right and what was wrong. I may not have always gone along with it, but deep down in every man, woman, and child is a fundamental idea of God, and call them your conscience, call it a gut reaction, call it innate intelligence, call it doubt. It's there. And that's what we're talking about, is this sense of right and wrong that we have. Or philosophy. Philosophy, to me, is knowledge gained through experience, learning things the hard way. And this isn't the one and only time he mentions this. We're going to play connect the dots here, my favorite game in this book. Keep your place here on page 44, but if you will, turn to the next page, 45. Second line. We found that such codes and philosophies didn't save us no matter how much we tried. Again, moral codes, sense of right and wrong. That philosophies that we're talking about, I heard someone refer to it as practical wisdom, which to me is just experience, knowledge gained through experience. So that's the second reference. And here's the third. See page 62, paragraph 2. 62, paragraph 2. I'd say right about in a midpoint in that paragraph where it says God makes that possible, and there often seems no way to entirely getting rid of self without his aid. Here it is. Many of us had moral and philosophical convictions galore. Again, moral, sense of right and wrong, philosophy, practical wisdom, knowledge gained through experience about the cause of things. That's all. It's just experience, learning life the hard way. All right, so let's get back, if you will, to page 44. Last line, I'm sorry, top of page 45, I'm sorry. But we found that such codes and philosophies did not save us no matter how much we tried. We could wish to be moral. We could wish to be philosophically comforted. We could wish to be comforted, to find relief in our experience. In fact, we could will these things, in other words, self-will these things with all of our might, with all of our willpower. But the needed power wasn't there. Please notice power in this case is lowercase. When Bill capitalizes the P in power, he's referring to God. When he keeps it lowercase, it's not a capital P, he's talking about human strength. And his point here is that we could be as moral as we want, we could have all the experience that we want, but we don't have the needed power to fix ourselves. A sick mind cannot heal a sick mind. Remember, we were powerless. And in case we missed the point of it, let's highlight this next sentence. Our human resources, what's human resources? Self-will. Our self-will, as marshaled by the will, as guided by the will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly. So now we're being introduced here to one of many inadequate, insufficient higher powers. Bill, in his story, mentioned fear. Fear sobered him for a bit, right? But it's an insufficient, inadequate, permanent solution to this problem. It's not the necessary power. Way back in the doctor's opinion, we were told another inadequate, insufficient higher power, and that's frothy emotional appeals. When the family begs you, pleads you, don't you see what you're doing to Pop? Don't you see what you're doing to yourself, to your family, to this, to that? God, please stop. That's a frothy emotional appeal. And in the doctor's opinion, it doesn't say it doesn't work. He says it seldom suffices, which means it's not enough. It worked for me when my brother and my dad and my uncles came down on me and did that kind of intervention where they had to hold that mirror up to show me what my life was doing to other people. I cleaned up for a while, for a bit, until the pressure was off. And then I went right back to what I was doing because self-will is insufficient, whether it's because of a frothy emotional appeal or fear, maybe losing a job, losing a marriage, whatever. Insufficient, inadequate higher powers. And we're going to come across quite a few of them as we continue through this book. All right. Next paragraph. It's only what, 4 lines long. We're going to highlight the whole paragraph. Lack of power. Notice power is lowercase. We're talking about strength, human strength. Lack of power, that was our dilemma. To put it in the words of the first step, that was our problem. Sorry about that. Miley is just getting a little temperamental here. Probably wants to go out, but she'll have to wait a bit. Okay. Lack of power, strength. That was our problem. We had to, and had to is a must, find a power, again, lowercase, find a power. That very clearly implies action. If I'm looking for something and I'm finding something, I'm taking action. I'm not sitting back and waiting for that ship to come in. I'm finding a power, which means I'm applying action. I'm working, by which we could live. You may want to underline by which we could live, not just stop drinking. We're not talking about just stop drinking, because we don't have a drinking problem anymore. The first step told us that. The first part of the first step says that I can't handle alcohol. I have a problem with alcohol. Second part of the first step after the dash says, and I can't handle sobriety either. And that's what we're talking about here. We had to find a power by which we could live, not just by which we could stop drinking. And it had to. There's another must. Sometimes must appears differently. It appears as had to. It appears as a number of different ways, essential requirements. And it had to be ups, italics, capital P, a power greater than ourselves. Obviously, but where and how were we to find this power? Now, I'm going to suggest add, you add something in there. Excuse me, just 1 minute. I'm sorry, really sorry about that. I'm asking, we're going to add something. It says, but where and how were we to find this power? I'm going to add a third question. When? Where were we going to find the power? How were we going to find the power? And when? So let's break it down. Underline where, and above it, let's write, see page 55. I know I'm letting the cat out of the bag. It's telling you where you're going to find that power, but he asked it. Let's deal with it. Page 55, second paragraph. Deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. Jump down to the next paragraph, 3 lines up from the bottom. We found the great reality. And once again, great reality is one of those many, many euphemisms Bill uses, so that if we have trouble with the G word, try some of these ideas. Spirit of the universe, great reality, the czar of the heavens. How about Waldo? Over in the UK, I think that's where's Wally. I mean, isn't that what we agnostics is about? They should change the name of this chapter to We Agnostic. From We Agnostics, they should change it to Where's Waldo? Because that's pretty much what this chapter's about. So call him Waldo, but call him what you want to call him. He's saying we found that great reality deep down within us. That's where. Now, if we go back to page 45, after where, the next question he says is how. How were we to find this power? Above that, underline how, please. And above it, write, see page 46. We don't even have to go that far. One page. Turn to page 46. The paragraph that begins with, yes, we of agnostic temperament. 3 lines down, it says, lay aside prejudice. That's step 1 in how to find God. 1, the first thing we have to do is set aside the things we think we know, the things we've been taught, the things we've been told, all of that excess baggage that we're carrying around. Set that aside. Later on the same line, it says, and express even a willingness, underline willingness, and that's number 2. We have to lay aside prejudice and be willing. Be willing. Those are 2 of the things we have to do. And here's the third thing. Bottom paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4 lines up from the bottom, you'll see the words hard terms with those who seek him. Miley's going to be taken care of. Miley's going to be taken care of. Don't worry about Miley. With those who seek him. Number 3 is seek. So there are the 3 things for how to find God. Lay aside prejudice, be willing, and seek. And seek means take action. Take action. Let's go back, if you will, to page 45, and we're going to answer the last question, the one that I've added, which is when. When? When do we find this power? Where? Deep down in every one of us, page 55. How? Page 46. Lay aside prejudice, be willing, seek. And when? See page 55 for when. And if you remember, we had the sentence that said, we found the great reality deep down within us. The next sentence tells us when. In the last analysis, it's there he may be found. In the last analysis, when we've looked everywhere else, we've tried everything else. We've tried vitamins, we've tried exercise, we've tried maybe just going to church, we've tried, how about meetings alone? Any of the things we've tried that have failed, the last thing I tried was the first thing that worked. And that's when we begin this work. When we've tried everything else, failed at everything else, and this is the last door on the last house on the last street. That's what Bill called it. Bill Wilson called AA the court of last resort, because it's the last stop for all of us. Okay, let's get back to page 45. And let's highlight and underline this first sentence. Well, that's exactly what this book is about. That's the real secret of the book, is coming up in the next sentence. And you may want to highlight the next sentence in pink because it's a promise. Its main objective is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself. Please underline this twice, which will solve your problem. Please notice it doesn't say we'll help you solve your problem. It doesn't say we'll enable you to solve your problem. It says that if you access that power will solve your problem. How's that for a promise? That is the real secret, the real essence of what the steps are about. That's what the steps are going to solve. It's your problem. Continuing, he said, that means we have written a book which we believe to be spiritual. Let's underline spiritual, and moral. Let's underline moral. Define terms. What's the difference between spiritual and moral? Well, I believe the term spiritual concerns the attempt to awaken to the presence of God in our lives. It's this spiritual journey that we're on. That's the spiritual part of our program. This attempt to awaken to this power, the presence of God in our lives. And moral. Moral refers to the guiding principles by which we will live once we access that power. Tolerance, compassion, patience, humility, forgiveness, love, goodwill. Those are the spiritual principles by which we will live, the moral principles by which we will live once we have accessed this power and our life has gone from self-centered to God-centered. That's what we mean by spiritual as well as moral. I'm sorry, hang on a sec. Okay, help has arrived. Sorry about that. So we've written a book which is spiritual, which refers to the journey that we're on, this quest to awaken to the power. And moral are the standards by which we will live once we've reached that power. You know, we go through our inventory to find out what are the defective thoughts that have been ruling, controlling, and dominating us up until this point. And as a result of the sixth and the seventh step, we begin to replace those defective thoughts with assets. So instead of being a source of conflict and confusion and chaos, we're now a source of harmony. Bill's going to say a couple of pages up on page 61, even in our best moments, meaning when our motives are right, are we not a source of conflict rather than a source of confusion, conflict rather than harmony, even when our intentions are well. Okay, continuing. And it means, of course, and let's highlight and underline, we are going to talk about God. Sorry, we're going to talk about God. From this point on, incidentally, we're done talking about alcohol. Not anymore. We're through with that. We're now going to be talking about accessing that power and how we're going to live with that power as our guide. That's what we're concerned with from this point on. We're done talking about alcohol. So here, difficulty arises with agnostics. Many times we talk to a new man, and you may want to highlight we talk to a new man in blue, because one of the things we do in the workshop is we highlight in blue the references to approach. Somehow in today's culture, it became acceptable to take the attitude of being available for the newcomer. Nowhere in this book does it say anything like that. This book is clear as glass. It is our job, responsibility to approach the newcomer, to approach the person who's struggling, to approach the person who's having difficulty. That's our job, not waiting for them to come to us. We forget what it was like in the beginning. Talk to a new man and watch his hope rise as we discuss his alcoholic problems and explain our fellowship, right? We tell him about the spirit of the fellowship, all those wonderful things that were telling us on page 17, the camaraderie, the democracy, the indescribably, wonderfully feeling. I don't know if he's talking about almond joys or mounds or fellowship, but they're indescribably delicious. Well, we talk about the fellowship, the spirit of the fellowship, and then, but his face falls when we speak of spiritual matters. Please underline spiritual. It doesn't say religious matters because we're not talking about religious matters. That's what the newcomer hears. That's what Bill heard when Ebby was talking about spirituality. That's what I heard when I came in here and you guys just used the word God. That's it. I knew it. It was a cult. This is a religious thing. It's a con job. That's what I thought. You're talking about God, spirituality. I'm hearing religion. And that's what we're talking about here. But his face falls when we talk about spiritual matters, especially when we mention God. For, and you may want to underline this, we have reopened a subject which our man thought he had neatly evaded or ignored. Remember, on the other page, we mentioned a couple of terms that he was using before. We avoided these things. Well, we avoid it. We hope against hope. And here we have two more. We evade it. We ignore it. There's a couple more coming, incidentally. Um, we know how he feels. You may want to underline that. And above it, I've written, what a relief I finally belong. Because that's how I felt when I came in here. My number one excuse was always to tell people, yeah, but you don't understand. I mean, how are you going to explain craving to somebody who's never experienced it? Come on. I didn't have that terminology. I didn't know to use those words. But it's just as frustrating. I couldn't explain to people. I couldn't explain to myself. I didn't understand myself. Why can't I just stop? I didn't understand. So how am I going to expect anyone else to understand? So when he says, we know how he feels, I finally belong because you understand. I can't tell you, no, you don't. You haven't been there because you have. We've shared his honest doubt and prejudice. That's the first use of the word prejudice in this chapter. He uses that word 6 times in the course of the chapter. I don't want to, at this late hour, start bouncing around for the other 6. We'll come across them as we come across them. But the word prejudice is used a lot in We Agnostics, 6 times to be precise. And that's the first use of it. And let's underline, some of us have been violently anti-religious. I've got a handout that we call about organized religion, about how we go from being violently anti-religious to making use of what religious people have to offer. There's a journey there. Well, we're going to start on it. And please highlight the rest of this paragraph. To others, the word God brought up a particular idea of him which someone had, and you may want to underline this one, tried to impress them during childhood. Anybody here have religious training as you were growing up? Right? I had to go to Hebrew school every day after regular school from 3:30 to 5:30 between the ages of 9 and 14. Every day I had to go to Hebrew school for religious training, and I friggin' hated it. I hated it. All they were doing was cramming more dogma down my throat, telling me what to believe and why to believe and what to wear and what to say and how to stand. All of those wonderful things about religions. Those harsh terms were about to be introduced to the fact that God doesn't make harsh terms with those who seek him. You know who makes harsh terms? Religions make harsh terms. God doesn't. So, which someone had tried to impress them during childhood. Perhaps we rejected this particular conception because it seemed inadequate. And I'm going to suggest you underline this last sentence. With that rejection, we imagined we had abandoned the God idea entirely. So we have avoided the issue, we have hoped it away, we have tried to evade it, we have tried to ignore it, and here we are abandoning the God idea entirely. Now, what does that mean? To me, when other people's conceptions of God didn't work for me, failed to work for me, I mistakenly concluded that God was not available to me. My conception of God was riddled with prejudice and misconceptions. I had an experience when I was 16 with LSD where I felt I experienced God. And those of you who've had experience with acid know that's not such an unusual thing. It happens all the time on acid, right? Well, I really believed I did. And so when I came out of it, I went in search of that power without that chemical. So I didn't bother with synagogues, but I went to Protestant churches, Catholic churches. I chanted with the Hare Krishnas in New York, you know, the guys with the gowns and the finger symbols and the schwanz on their shaved heads. Well, that doesn't work for me because I believe God creates us in his own image, and I know he wouldn't wear his hair like that. So that was off the table for me. But in any case, um, when others' conceptions didn't work, and I went through all of those things, I just figured God's not accessible to me. And that's part of the baggage that I brought in here, that agnosticism, because I didn't have experience with God being a power of good in my life. The only experience I had, as I mentioned, was bad. Let's continue. Let me just finish this last paragraph. No, you know what? I'm going to stop right there. Let's leave it at with that rejection, we imagined we had abandoned the God idea entirely. We'll pick up next week with Steve at the bottom of the page. We were bothered with the thought. I'm going to turn the recording off and see if anyone's got any questions or shares.